quickly, I just wanted you guys to have a 3-4 minute break before we come in, but it was super helpful to be with more directly talking to you, and I think it's great to be able to do breakout sessions to know each other better and to learn where we're coming from as we're moving forward. So thank you for your participation and your great ideas and comments, which David will be sharing in a few minutes as we are hearing from each other's group. Did you want to add something, Greg?
Just our conversation in Group B was terrific. The ability to have actual interchange was much greater than when we've had our larger meetings. So to the extent that we can work the technology more to make it a more smooth transition, I think this will be an important part of our work going forward. And Deb Barker's going to report back for our group. She actually, without having been forewarned, took notes. So I think we're in for a treat there. Thank you, Deb, for volunteering.
Okay, so let's go ahead and hear from both of our reporters back. If we want to start with Group A and then B. David, you ready?
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty good at taking half-finished notes, but let me see if I can represent folks. And if I do misrepresent anyone in distilling the notes, please chime in probably after, so I'll just try to get through this quickly. And we sort of talked through a few different conversations, and I tried to take notes as best I can in response to the biggest concerns about the bridge. These are in no particular order, but there was thoughts that the tunnel conversation should be included more prevalently in public conversation so that pro-tunnel folks feel heard and that the option feels legitimately considered rather than the potential for tunnel advocates feeling left out and potentially that a lawsuit, which was mentioned, could be the only option to put on the table. So just bringing it into the conversation more. Lower bridge access communications are unclear, and we need to communicate the limits of lower bridge capacity as part of the justification for the public restrictions, and just being, again, more clear with folks in the public about that. A potential toll will be divisive. It feels like penalizing folks for already being constricted. So that if it is an option, will be one that brings out the pitchforks. General concern from community about things taking so long. That's just a note. I think we all probably are aware of that. But really highlighting the timeline comparison between a bridge and a tunnel, and the funding not being quite as much of a concern for the public as much as the timeline. By hook or by crook in terms of the money, but moving the line forward is community concern. In terms of neighborhood plans, we still need to keep working on the traffic mitigation needs while all the longer timelines are worked out. In providing options for the public or letting folks know what the options that we're weighing, just really being clear with timeline and budget estimates so we know what we're deciding on. There was thoughts that just like was said a minute ago, the breakout session is nice. Task force meetings are a lot to take in and still provide comments, so that was a way to drive more dialogue. Direct bus service downtown is of interest to folks, particularly in Admiral and neighborhoods like that. Again, timeline is concerned. People want a solution now. All the timelines we're talking about are long, so just managing expectations is a worthwhile endeavor. Access to terminals, using the lower bridge for terminal access. Terminal 5 is under negotiations pre-bridge, so this has complicated that and puts timeline pressures on the port. And then just another reason why maintenance of the lower bridge is very important. Fred mentioned on behalf of the port has their priorities, but is also part of the solution with some land ownership that could be helpful for alternative transportation opportunities. Another voice saying traffic getting in and out of neighborhoods is challenging. People want quicker timelines, if we haven't heard that yet. Thought about real estate being affected, both property values in terms of homeowners, the rental market, and a longer timeline will affect that more. So just having, I don't know how we bring that into the conversation, but it was voiced. And then sound transit light rail integration is certainly of public interest and at least ought to be in the conversation, particularly publicly, I think. Could there be mutual benefits? And then publicizing the status of those conversations if they're being had, even if it's a non-starter, voicing it to the public, I think will be helpful because people are wondering about that and how there may be mutual benefit of collaborating on a crossing. Traffic on West Marginal Way, still a concern, particularly pedestrian safety, particularly at the Duwamish Longhouse. In repair or replace conversation, some concern that the repair option is just delaying the inevitable and prioritizing long-term or short-term solutions versus, the solutions that we put forward here are going to last generations. And so focusing on those long-term solutions in favor of the short-term mitigation was mentioned. And if we're just going to need to replace it, are we just kicking the can down the road? Yeah, that was the same point. Push for more transit trips. This was my comment, I think, or consolidated comments. In the formula for how we're getting people across more without the bridge, transit is a big part of that, but with COVID concerns and with generally less trips and more restrictions on Metro, there needs to be some conversation about how that's going to look. And I'll get into it more, but there was just more interest in getting Metro to be a part of this task force and be part of the public conversation in terms of what they're planning and how it can help. Bringing bikes onto light rail is part of a new commute, but there's limited capacity. If Sound Transit can add bike capacity, that could help all of our priorities. So are they being in the conversation? Again, sort of Sound Transit and Metro are big parts of this conversation, but we don't hear from them yet. So we would benefit from having them represented on the task force or at least visiting. In response to the question of how we can better represent community or potentially streamline these meetings, it was suggested to prompt the whole task force with questions in advance that can go out into community, and we can all be asking our constituents the same questions and bring back more than sort of, hey, what have you all heard? Having those questions in advance as a tool for engagement would be helpful. Was suggested to potentially have longer task force meetings so that we're not feeling like we're cutting things short and that we're making forward progress, affecting the broader timelines. Clarifying the deliverables and timeline for this task force more broadly and holistically, like what are we actually looking to achieve? And then there was suggestion about, in terms of streamlining the process, potentially splitting off into sub-task force groups focused on areas where we might be more expert. So either the repair and replace conversation, a bridge versus tunnel, and then if we're talking traffic mitigation, hearing the voices representing the communities that are most directly affected. I'm not in Georgetown, so I shouldn't be chiming in as much on the Georgetown combo, etc., for an example. And then just prioritizing the expertise we have, making sure that we're getting out into other neighborhood meetings so that we're doing our due diligence and representing community voice and stoking the conversation in other groups. And then just, again, looking at ourselves in a mirror, how can we be better as a task force? Just, again, distilling and compiling info so that we can show up better prepared and relay info back out to community. And then coordinating timelines with the SDOT blog so that we're not catching up with the public in terms of info. And if we're going to, just being clear about when the public will find out about things and when the task force will also find out and whether that's coordinated. That was a lot in no particular order. I will stop there. And if folks have gaps to fill in or questions, I guess ask them. I'm muting myself.
You did an amazing job. Thank you, David.
Good
You're so
work.
I really appreciate it. Maybe a couple of things that I didn't hear, but you may have said it was getting an apple, and that is present. There was a very strong feeling of the possibility for a split up into subgroup. If the case, some people that are very interested in the neighborhood mitigation, traffic, and the replace, repair bridge conversation or tunnel. So I wanted to bring that up too to the report. And the idea of bringing Metro to report back and what are their efforts in possible transit. Did you mention that too, and I missed it?
I would like to hear from other folks, not right now, about the notion of longer meetings. I mean, none of us are seeking longer meetings, but we're all taking time away from businesses or family. So we've been trying to be very tight on how we've staged these meetings, which I know is frustrating, but it also is an attempt to try and understand that you all are sacrificing very valuable time to spend with us. So let's have some more conversation about that. We certainly can load up the meetings, and maybe there's a trade-off between longer meetings and fewer meetings. I don't know if that's the case, but I know that Pauline and I are looking for ways to make this meaningful for you and as painless as possible. So thank you for those. Deb, why don't you chime in with Group B?
Thank you. I'm just going to start off by saying that Group B, we had double labor representatives, which was great to have, and also double elected representatives, or maybe triple if we put Mayor Nichols in there. But it was, and also Councilmember Herbold sent a rep. So we had great representation. I'm just going to read through what people said. First off the bat was question mark on trying to identify what the status is of motorcycles. A lot of motorcycles use the corridors, had used the bridge, now on surface streets, and so trying to identify what the status of the motorcycles is on the low bridge. Speeding in South Park, huge concerns. The volumes beyond the speeding are quite a concern, and folks are looking to try and take action themselves. Did you know that you can go to Home Depot and get your own speed bump, but don't tell anyone? The motorcycle issue came up a couple times, but the amount of traffic in Highland Park was talked about. People are unable to maneuver out of their personal vehicle spaces, and there's a lot of maneuvering that involve having people to get out of their cars and stop traffic so that a vehicle or a waste management truck can get into and out of a roadway. So things that hadn't been anticipated are happening within the impacted neighborhoods. Heard from Sodo that really the world outside of West Seattle has not stopped, and many of our businesses are essential and they are operating. And with more people on the roadway, traffic is dire enough that things could be coming to a halt within those important freight corridor areas. There was a question about the status of the Lander overpass, and that is looked to be a fall opening, and that may help. Well, it should help, but it's not open yet. Georgetown is slammed, and that's a definite reality. Also, one thing that was mentioned with some of the labor issues is who is missing from the table, and the building trades are missing from this discussion table. And that's very important with the current situation and also future for coming out of the economic downturn, and also with the construction repair and or rebuild of the West Seattle Bridge. Discussion about funding models and a little bit of talk about different types of funding models, diversions and tolls. We didn't get into too much nitty gritty on that, but definitely Georgetown is being heavily impacted. So several voices again about bringing the construction worker voice to the table, and an urgency to identify the solution. Everyone understood the reasons why we weren't there yet, but everyone is still feeling a sense of having a solution. Also with that solution, making sure that there's high labor standards involved with that, and recognizing the repairs and or rebuilds for the economic stimulus that, gosh, we are definitely going to need. West Seattle Junction and the small business community was talked about, and how they're trying to separate bridge issue from a pandemic issue, but it's still it's like one big huge ball rolling at them. And so learning about what's being done, what's tried to be done, and where it needs to go to help the small businesses throughout the D1 and other areas. Had a representative from King County, from Dow's office, sorry, who wants to ensure that the conversation about replacement happens in conjunction with whatever else is going on, and offered up that the administration will use all channels to push out the survey. Rachel offered up Dow to muscle some funding, which I wrote down because that was appropriate to have happen, and talked a little bit too about those King County resources of the water taxi and metro. All of those have capacity constraints right now because of COVID, and then there's the funding, but we were asked, the task force was asked, how can we help deal with some of the, help respond to these capacity issues on these very important systems, being water taxi and metro. We had Yasmin reporting from Washington, D.C. that they are hard at work to determine the existing resources that are available. Pramila Jayapal just spoke last week about the West Seattle Bridge and endorsed the Moving Forward bill. So they are actively looking for solutions for us, which was great to hear. We had Representative Cody noting that people are really, really eager for us to make decisions about this issue and not overthink it. She talked about the House Transportation Committee, and then Senator Wynn joined in about transparency about anything around the bridge is definitely needed, and how do we fund this thing. The transportation package, again, he mentioned, is being looked at, but the timing is critical. You've got to get into the current package discussion now about the West Seattle Bridge, because otherwise you may be several years out before this discussion opportunity comes back again. The mayor said he wanted to let everyone know that you never have all the funding in hand at the beginning, but you do need to have a plausible plan, and you need to build the trust between the jurisdictions to continue on your path to get the thing built. Lastly, we had a little bit of discussion about congestion pricing. Is it an option? Is it something that could be looked at? Mayor had been looking at it for downtown, so there was some discussion about this opportunity out here. And other discussion was that people feel that it's maybe easier to do the whole replacement at once, but whatever, if it's replacement or repair, what's important is that people need to be able to plan for their lives. And so whatever you do, you announce it as much as possible. The issue of having the low bridge accessible was huge to so many people because they could start to plan their life. The morale is suffering, and you want to try and give people hope, and or as it was also put, offer a vision on how it could be. I think I'm going to stop there because I'm out of my notes. Transparency, one voice, have everybody be on the same page. That's the end of my notes. You're muted.
I think you're still on mute, Mayor Nichols, but Deb, perfectly on time, 2 o'clock on the dot.
Michael, anything for the good of the order?
I just want to say thank you again to everybody for bearing with us on our exploration of the limits of WebEx technology, but I do think that the pain was worth it. It seemed like the conversations were able to be more intimate, more constructive. Just a quick reminder that meeting number 5 will be happening on July 22nd. And we will have additional details and calendar invites, etc. follow forth. So I'll just turn it back over to Greg and Paulina to close this out.
Paulina?
I actually wanted to have Director Zimbabwe address. He was sitting in one of the groups to say a few things of.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, I said it to Group A, which I said, but I'll say it to everybody that I really appreciated hearing this feedback and getting feedback and hearing a little bit more in detail from the group that I was in about sort of how we can continue to work productively with the task force. I greatly appreciate everybody's time and effort and energy in bringing these things, and also the work of all the SDOT staff that are working to staff this group and work with community and make sure that we're communicating out and receiving information in ways that are effective for everybody. So I will just reiterate again that we really appreciate everybody's feedback, and there were a lot of issues that were raised here that will have to come back to the task force with more information as we move forward. So thanks everybody for your efforts.
And I can assure you that Pauline and I will take back the pieces that didn't get mentioned in the report back, as well as those that did, to the SDOT staff, and we will do everything we can to be responsive to those. Your time is very valuable. We know that. And I want to thank you very, very much for your participation in this. It's an important project for all of us, and we are going to find a solution. So thank you all.